Hello everyone and welcome back to our series of Learning to Code with P5. Today in this video we will be talking about arrays, a bit more on arrays, but with motion. So let's get started. Okay, so first things first, make sure that you have remixed your project, and then we can start off on the new one. But just want to be clear because we will be building up on our concept of arrays from our previous video that we have discussed. And before we do that, I want to recap a few things, right? We have already worked by adding motion to a single variable. And now in this one, we will try to see how can we add motion to lots of variables, right? So we will try to recap a bit about motion with a single variable and then try to translate it to arrays. So we kind of know that, and I'm going to go to give a quick recap. So if you want to have, revise or have a bit more clarity or an in-depth sort of an example, maybe it would be a good idea for you to revisit the motion video. But just quickly saying, so we know that, let's say if, okay, let's get started with something more simple here. So if we are trying to create a circle which we want to move, of course, we know that we will need to create a variable for X and Y position just to sort of like make it move, but I'm just trying to keep it simple here. So if this is our goal, so let's say let X be 0, and then let Y be 0. Okay, so we are starting off from here. We can see that. Maybe let's just go here and make it no fill at this point in time. And maybe we can add a little bit of stroke weight to it. Not necessarily, it's just for fun, just to set it up. Thick enough. Okay, so if we are doing that, okay, so if we want, okay, let's pause it here. So I'm going to comment out Y for now and take it here so that we kind of know that this is how we sort of begin. Okay, so if we wanted it to move on the x-axis, we know that that means that we need to change the value of X over a period of time, right? So how can we do that? We can either say X plus equals 1, right? So now what is happening is that our circle has started moving. Of course, it's going incrementally 1, but it's slow, but it will get there. So that's the main sort of thing that we know. Now it goes off canvas, but we know how to kind of bring it back. We can add a conditional where we can kind of restrict it within the confines of the canvas, right? So we can say, okay, if X is less than 0, or X is greater than width of the canvas, you're going to reverse the direction. But we can't do that if we have a hard-coded number of 1. So let's just add an X speed and give this number here, and then I can change this to X speed here, right? And then here in this one, what we can say is that because instead of giving a hard-coded number, we have changed it into a variable called X speed, and now we can reverse the direction. And how can we reverse that is by actually literally saying it as a negative, and then it should work, but it would not work with all the typos that I'm making. So let's try to increase it, make it 5. Maybe let's see, we can see it coming back and forth faster. So now this is still within the confines of our width of the canvas. So now that we know that, we can kind of do the same thing for, let's say, our Y position as well. So we know that now we're going to use it here. We can perhaps try and we can copy the whole thing, because we will not just create a variable for Y, but we will also do the same thing for I should be more specific around here. We will do the same thing for y as well. So let's just, and I'm going to change this to y and copy this whole thing and convert it for y. This is just hopefully saving us time and not doing a lot of errors on our end. So let's see. And now what I'm saying is, okay, as long as it is, if y is less than 0 or greater than height, what you need to do is basically reverse this for us. The thing is that because right now the x speed and the y speed are both the same, so it's kind of like stuck within this like loop of just going, it will keep on increasing at the same time, but it's kind of making the diagonal. Maybe let's see if we kind of move it. See, so now you can actually see the whole pattern it is making just because we have removed that. So now because the speed is the same, I'll let it, yeah. So I'm going to bring this back. It will clear up the background, but you could see the whole trail of how it was moving. If we want to change that, we can actually, let's say, define this one here and then make it a bit more random. So let's say here, what we can say is make the x speed random between, let's say, -2 and 2. And we can then do the same thing for y as well. Just one thing that I want to bring to your attention is that if you're trying to work with the with the random function, you cannot assign a random value right at the beginning because there has been no initial value assigned to it. So you're just going to declare it first and then assign it value a bit later. So that's one thing. And why this is important, I'm just telling because we can run into these kind of errors, is because that it wouldn't understand how like random it is because our canvas has not been created. So we will just put it after that in our setup function. Okay, so this is kind of like randomly moving at this point in time. Okay, so going back to this, we kind of understand that how it's going back and forth. Okay, maybe it might be faster on one end and then not so much on the other end. Okay, so that's one thing. We can keep playing around or change with it. That's perfectly fine. So now we understand that this is the kind of thing that we can do when we are adding motion to a single variable, right? So imagine what needs to be done if we have to do the same thing but for an array, right? So maybe take a pause, think about it, and if not, then we can, continue this further. So instead of doing this, maybe what we can do is start off with an empty variable here, right? We know that eventually we will need to declare variables first, and then we can start assigning values and work with them. And let's try, because at this point in time, this is an empty variable. Let's try to do the same thing where we have created an empty variable, and instead of putting lots of variables, let's start with one variable inside that array. Okay, so what needs to be done in this case is going to be that we will have to define, let's say, for the array x at the index value 0, we will put a number, right? We could have actually put just 0 to it, would have started from that point, so that doesn't matter. But this is just to show you, of course, now the starting point would be 100, 100, so that's sort of a different thing. But of course, our code is broken. We can't see anything on our canvas. And if we do the same thing for our x and y speed, why this is happening is because we are talking about one variable which is at index 0. So now we need to put that or refer each and every array to that specific index number, right? So that it knows what we are talking about. So I'm going to just copy this square brackets and 0 thing and try and paste it here, because that is what we will need to do for each of these things, so that, you know, these elements kind of start working. And we can see our broken code come to life again. So this is just an example. And then here as well, when we are actually calling it in the function of circle, we need to actually point it to that specific variable as well within that array, right? The array is not long enough at this point in time. It only holds a single variable, but it is an array at this point in time now. Okay, so this we've been able to do from a single variable to an array with a single variable. But what if our array is, I don't know, made up of 100 variables, right? So how can we make it a bit more dynamic? And this is going back to the same point where we know that working with for loops and arrays is a really good idea. For loop and our arrays are going to be really good friends. So what we can do here is that instead of initializing one at a time, because it would be super inefficient for us to do that. We have right now done it for one variable, right? Like we can't do this and replace 0 and starting with an index 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 all the way going to 99. That's definitely not working. So we will start off working with our for loop here. So here in this case, we will again do the same thing. We will do our index where we will say, okay, let I is 0 and then I is less than 100. We are starting off with this, and then we can pull all the code inside our for loop and then let it see. Okay, so one thing that we know is, if we remember from our previous one, that now we need to use this variable, which is going to be dynamic. We will put it in our x, y, and x speed and y speed arrays so that it can actually go through the loop starting from 0 and all the way till 99. And so it can, you know, assign values. So I'm gonna do this here, and then instead of assigning 100 value to each of these, okay, why does this keep happening in glitch? I'm gonna refresh this page again, and hopefully whatever we have coded so far stays there. Awesome. Okay, so instead of giving a hard-coded number, we are gonna try and give like a random width and a random height for our x and y variables. Okay, so that way it's going to pick any random number and then assign it. So what we have done is here is that we have by now created empty variables. We have in our for loop assigned values or initial values to all of these variables that are in these arrays. Each of them is 100. Okay, and now what we can do is here is that we need to replace it. And again, you know, if we have to replace it, we have to keep in mind that it's going to be again a for loop, right? So let's start again with our for loop so that we can put it inside here. We will say let I is 0. Again, I is less than 100. Why? Because we have created and assigned values to 100 variables. We are keeping it the same, and I'm going to show you how that might be different if we don't do that. And I'm going to pick up this entire piece of code, sorry, including our value here, and I'm going to bring it within our for loop. I'm going to format this file once again. And now instead of 0, we have to pass it through all the index inside, right? So I'm going to replace literally all the 0 with I, which means that it's going to loop through as many times as we have set the condition within our for loop. And that is what it is going to do for us. Okay, so this is just a way to show you going from a single variable versus all the way to multiple variables in an array. But of course, going forward, you can directly start working, you know, with this sort of format, and it is going sort of jittery and crazy because it doesn't know what to do. It's like I'm half done. Okay, so I'm gonna try and bring this here. Let's move this. Right now, the speed, this one, if we make it a bit more similar, let's see how that might be. It's a bit more slow and steady at the same time. So this is how we are able to actually move each and every different circle within this canvas and have that sort of motion. One thing that I would like to point your attention to, of course, we are working with circle, but you don't have to stick to this only. Imagine, okay, I'm gonna comment this out and let's try and work with, instead of circle, let's do a rect. And then instead of doing this, maybe, okay, this is taking up as a square right now, just because, you know, it's, if third value is 1, so it's taking up for both. But if you wanted to make it a more of a rectangle, right, like we can do that. If we add, interesting thing is that if we add a fifth parameter to a rectangle, it can actually curve its edges. So if we want to do that, we can totally do this right now. Okay. And you know, you can play around with different shapes and use different parameters. You've pretty much set the entire code. You can use those different parameters and work around with different shapes. So that's totally your call. And then one last thing that I want to mention here is that we have been working a lot with like variables and you know, making our code a bit more dynamic for us. If you notice, let's say if I had, this is an empty variable at this point in time, right? All of these are. But for this, in this loop, I have put 100, right? That means that there are going to be 100 variables in these arrays. But if I make this 1,000, that means that I have literally assigned it for and created, you know, these 1,000 variables. But here I'm only working with 100. That means that I'm just seeing only 100, unless that I also make this 1,000, right? So now you can like literally see those both being changed. But if, let's say, I keep this as 1,000 and I make this 100 only, it would not work, because I'm trying to use it for 1,000, but assigned values are only for 100. So that becomes a little bit different. You know, if you change one value and if you forget to change the other one, a good practice is that one thing that you can do is, let's say if you've put it here, 100, which is one hard-coded number. Now this 100 has been assigned to all these arrays, right? All of these arrays have 100 variables. So you can literally pick one of these arrays and call it x dot length. Remember, we talked about dot length, which means that it is basically saying, go to the array x and take the value, whatever is, or whatever the length of that array is, use that value here. So it will basically be the same in this case. So that is one thing. You could literally be doing y dot length and it would result the same thing. But if you want to make it a bit more dynamic and not worry about it at all, is that if we introduce a variable, that way it becomes just far more easier for us and not worry about it at all. So let's just call it a number, which is 100. And then here what I can do it, instead of writing a hard-coded number, I can assign it as num here. I can literally do it the same way here. Now this way I can make it only 10 and it would work. I can make it 1,000 and it would work. Of course, you know, it can become more or less depending on how much your hardware can support. There are certain limitations, but for code, it's just super dynamic for us. We don't need to do a lot of work, and you don't even need to make a lot of changes below as well. So just this, and it would just work great for you because you've set up all the structure and everything. So that was it, how to make your array and lots of variables move. And yeah, try it out and see what more you guys can do with it. See you in the next video.